So there's a report from John Wilner, and if John Wilner says it in college sports, it's basically the gospel. It's verifiable fact that if he's reporting it, it's the truth. He's been on top of everything when it comes to the Pac-12 for decades. And when it was announced that USC and UCLA were going to join the Big Ten, he had it first, and he was right. When Washington and Oregon were going to tell the Pac-12 that it was over, he was right. Utah, Arizona State, Colorado joining the Big 12, he's right. Had it all together the entire time. John Wilner was correct each and every time. And so I take what he says with a whole lot of reverence. And he had a report over the weekend that basically said it wasn't so much a report as he was answering mailbag questions. And essentially he says, hey, Stanford and Cal were wanted by the Big Ten. The Big Ten wanted Stanford and Cal. But Fox didn't want to pay for Stanford and Cal in 2024. And so that's why they're in the ACC. And that's it. That's the report. Fox didn't see a need for Stanford and Cal in the Big Ten. So Stanford and Cal aren't in the Big Ten. But the overwhelming majority of Big Ten presidents, Big Ten athletic directors, everybody viewed Stanford and Cal with, strong Olympic sports and the Bay Area and their academic prestige, which, if I can go on just like a slight tangent for just a second, the idea, I understand that colleges and universities want to be grouped together by a perceived academic prestige, right? Like it makes sense for Harvard to be in the same conference with Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Columbia, etc. Just like it makes sense for, just on the same side, it doesn't make sense for Notre Dame to be in the same conference as Chicago State. I get that. But we are talking about athletics here. And there's a difference. And I realize that there is I don't know what the perfect wording here. There's a misguided, misaligned, maybe is the word to use. Athletic and academics should be somewhat separate when you're talking about prioritizing billion-dollar TV contracts, I think. But that's just me. I realize that athletic directors have bosses, they're presidents, they care about these things. So as a whole, I get it. But the idea that adding essentially a West Wing to the Big Ten that's currently 4 schools and could have been 6 schools, one, and I think everybody's going to come to regret this at some point. Stanford and Cal are not going to be thrilled with their home in the ACC for a variety of reasons. 1, geographically, not great. 2, financially, not great. 3, when you look at what could/might have been in the Big Ten with Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, Stanford, and Cal, have a lot to be happy about. In the ACC, not so much. I think Fox is probably going to come back and regret, like, oh, hey, I wish we'd probably just ponied up for Stanford and Cal. Because when the ACC crumbles, it feels like maybe more of a when if the ACC crumbles rather than an if the ACC crumbles. Where is Stanford and Cal going to go? Probably to the Big Ten. And that price tag is only going to go up. Like the idea that the Big Ten and SEC are going to stop at a certain number of teams in their conference, I don't agree with. And eventually, the Big Ten's going to have more inventory than Fox, NBC, CBS, and the Big Ten Network can all handle. which means ESPN comes back into the play. And Fox is going to go, crap. Could have probably had that one. So the idea that Stanford and Cal are in the ACC strictly because Fox wasn't willing to pay them in 2024 is ridiculous to me. It's short-sighted from the Big Ten's perspective, from Stanford and Cal's perspective, and from Fox's perspective. It's a perfect storm of idiocy that everybody eventually is going to go, you know what? If back in 2023 we had just said like, instead of accepting that ACC invite, and I get it, it's a life preserver in a very rocky, unstable ocean for Stanford and Cal. That their options were be reduced to a complete lack of relevancy or join the ACC when it was made aware to them that the Big Ten wasn't going to be an option. So I understand that that's a life raft when they needed one the most. But in hindsight, that decision is going to be like, if we had just waited a year, maybe 2 years, are they in the Big Ten? Probably. Because the way the landscape has changed even in the course of the last 2 years is crazy. It's nuts. It's outrageous. In the last 18 months, the way the college sports landscape has completely been reinvented. What leads you to believe that it can't/won't happen again in the next 18 months, the next 2 years, the next 5 years? Because in all likelihood, it probably will. If Florida State is successful in getting out of its ACC grant of rights, the ACC is going under. Because Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, Duke, maybe Virginia Tech are looking, and Georgia Tech probably, are looking at homes in the SEC and the Big Ten, which leaves Stanford and Cal looking for a new home, probably in the Big Ten. But it doesn't, nothing highlights the fact that college football is kind of run by, in college sports in general, are run by quasi-idiots who don't know their ass from a hole in the ground, where eventually, like, we're all going to come back to these moments and say, like, we probably got that one wrong. And I don't think it's all that hard to foresee how the Big Ten is going to, and I get everybody's looking out for their own money in the Big Ten. But if you think, if the presidents, the athletic directors, if everybody says it's a great location, Bay Area, great Olympic sports, great academic prestige with those two universities, but we can't get you any money till 2025 or 2026, why don't you just bite the bullet and accept your $89 million from your TV partners instead of your $100 million? Like, doesn't that just seem kind of like a logical thing? Like, okay, we're pretty set in the overwhelming majority of the schools in the Big Ten financially, that we have done a good job budgeting, etc. The idea that you weren't going to be able to get an additional $100 million or $150 million for Stanford and Cal, which I don't think is unreasonable for Fox to not pay upfront, but for the Big Ten to not just go like, okay, yeah, we'll just bite the bullet for the next couple of years, and then the next time the TV contracts are up and we're negotiating from a ridiculous spot of leverage, pride, and everybody wants our product, then we can really use Stanford and Cal to our advantage. It makes all the sense in the world, and yet Stanford and Cal are in the ACC. College sports are run by idiots that don't have a ton of foresight, a ton of forethought, a ton of... Nobody really has a bunch of balls to tell you that, like, to just be frank about it. Not many college administrators, whether they're commissioners, athletic directors, not many have a backbone or the berries to do things that require going out on a limb. And it's why it took 135 years for everybody in the sport to eventually be like, oh, wait a second, is this a business? Oh, shit, it is. And so it frustrates me because nobody has the berries to just go out and do something or say what they believe in. And so when this John Wilner report comes out that, hey, everybody in the Big Ten was like, yeah, we want Stanford and Cal, but because Taco Bell's closed tonight, we're not eating at all. Wait, there are lots of ways to make this happen. No, snap, sorry. It might cost our collective schools like $3 million a piece. And we're just not willing to do that. I just don't understand, like, walking through the grocery store and seeing something you want. You're like, hell yeah. I want to take that home. And then when push comes to shove, you're like, oh, wait, like I might not be able to go to Starbucks tomorrow if I buy those 2 items that I really want today. Yeah, I'm not going to do it. What the hell are you doing? But that's the way it operated. That's the way it went down. And that's how 2 schools in the Pacific time zone are in an Atlantic Coast conference. It doesn't make any sense to me either. And I think eventually someday we're going to come back around to this and be like, well, wait a second. Doesn't it make a little bit of sense if? And the answer will be, yeah. Yeah, it does make a little sense if. So we'll see where that gets us eventually. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you were watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we're pumping out here on the Daily Huddle. If you're listening on the podcast feed, I should say, drop a 5-star review. Goes a long way in helping out the channel. Back at it tomorrow here on the Daily Huddle.